First, we're going to draw ourselves a horizon line. So about a third of the way up from the bottom of the paper, draw a quick pencil line. And it might be a little hard to see here, but I can provide you with another outline. I'm going to go in and start drawing some clouds. Just a very light sketch. You really want to barely see the pencil marks, but it will be worth it to give yourself a guide of where you're going to go. So I make them a little fluffy on the top, and then I draw a straightish line below. And to the right here, we're going to have a little bit of those straighter clouds, I guess I should say, less puffy. Another one to in the middle here, straighter on the downside, and then one more to the left of the paper, and then some more of those straight clouds at the bottom. First thing I'm going to do is take a medium brush to big brush, and I'm going to take a cobalt blue and water it down. And I'm going to start at the bottom or to the right of the paper, and I'm just going to start outlining the top of the clouds with a little bit of water, a little bit of color, but I'm not going to take it all the way across the page, or if you're looking at it this way, I'm not going to take it all the way up the page. But I want to start defining the tops of my clouds. I kind of want it dark on top of the cloud because I want to see the distinguished difference between the top of the cloud and the sky. And then before everything dries, I'm going to go in with some more color, some more water, even it all out. I'm going to take that blue almost all the way over to the side of the page, but not quite as far. I'm using 140-pound hot press watercolor paper. That's just what I had on hand. I'm using Case for Making homemade watercolors. Their pigments are fantastic, and this is a cobalt blue. And then I'm using the round Mimic squirrel hair brush. I believe this one's a round 8. And now that I've had some of that blue down, I'm going to clean up my brush completely and go in with a little bit of yellow to come in from the top of the page or left side of the page. But I don't quite want to mix the yellow with the blue. I want to make sure that those stay separate, but that they're both included in the top of the painting. So I'm going to take that yellow, almost touching the blue, but not quite, and I want to bring it below that cloud to the left as well. And then I'm just going to take some water and pull that pigment out. And I'm going to define the top of those other clouds. You'll see clouds start to form here. And I don't want to mix it with the blue too much. I want to just push those colors together and let them do their own work, because if you mix it too much, you're going to get that greenish color, which isn't terrible. That is part of a sunset and really colorful sky, but I don't want too much green. And this looks like it'll dry nicely. So now I'm going to go in with some orange below that cloud and start pulling in the orange through the bottom of that cloud to the left or to the top. And what I do here, occasionally you'll see that I tap my brush dry and then I pull the existing ink and the existing pigment to a dry part of the paper. It's called pulling, P-U-L-L-I-N-G. So I place some ink down. I'm going with that nice bright fluorescent pink. And now I'm going to pull that to where I want it to go. If I added more water at this point, it would probably be too much of the same color. I wouldn't get a whole lot of variation. So now I'm just pulling it where I want it to go, beneath that cloud, and then also within the little striations of the straighter cloud. And I really just want to lay that color down. Now what I'm going to do is think about the light. So the light is coming from the left side or the top of the page, and so those left side of the clouds are going to have a little tiny bit of that reflection. So I put the color down, and now I'm going to do some more pulling. I'm pulling the color out so I don't have a ton of pigment, but just so it has a little bit of shading to the left of each of those clouds to reflect what would be the light. Sorry for the shadows here. Now I'm also giving this a little bit of time to dry because I want to come in and reflect those colors down in the water, but I don't want them to blend up into the existing ones too much. So notice my side-to-side movements. I have a smaller brush now. This is a Winsor Newton Cotton brush. It's a pretty small round. And I'm just doing those reverse colors, mirroring them down into the water, just side-to-side strokes. I'm going to lay some color down first. I'm going to get that yellow in there, some orange. And you'll see once I lay down some of these colors, I'm just going to take a wet brush and I'm going to pull those existing ones, the existing colors out. I really just want to reflect what's in the sky. So notice I'm coming in with a little bit of water and just pulling some of these colors together and letting the watercolor do its thing. I don't want to completely color it in. I'm dry brushing a little bit too, and I'm not completely coloring it in. And now I'm going to go in with a little bit of that blue. Since that pink is fairly dry, I can go into the pink and it not completely blend together, but give me a nice water-looking, fluid water. Now I'm bringing it all the way up to the horizon line. And something I always talk about is layering. So this is just our first layer. We're going to go in with a couple more shades of blue and get darker and darker as we go. We always start light and then get darker. So now I'm going in with a little bit more blue to reflect that side of the sky. I keep the water really loose, and then I'm going to reflect some more blue on the other side to kind of fill it in, because water is, for the most part blue, but does reflect some of that light. And now I'm going to let this dry for quite a bit. I can go in with a little bit more color first though. Notice this is just a shade darker of blue. I've taken some cobalt and I've taken a little bit more pigment and less water, and I'm adding it on top of my existing blues. And take a look at what I have so far, because now is where you let it dry for at least 5 minutes. I don't want any bleeding between that bottom part and the top part. What I'm doing here is just fixing a little bit of that striation. I want it to be a little bit more organic, of a flowing yellow, and there seemed to be a water drop in there. So I'm just smoothing it out. But now we wait. I've given my clouds time to dry, so now I can go up and do some of these clouds and not worry about them bleeding into my existing water. So I'm going to take some cobalt blue. I'm going to take a little bit of red or a magenta and start to mix together a purplish hue. And that's what's going to give us our moody coloring of our clouds. So this is the ultimate pulling. What I'm doing is placing a line of color at the bottom of the cloud, because that's where the shadow is. The light's coming from the top, which means the bottom of the cloud is shaded. So I'm going to apply this color, and then I dry my brush off, and I'm going to pull and just swipe that existing line. Notice how I'm shaking my hand a little bit. I'm drying off my brush even a little bit more and just pulling that color out. Keep bringing some water and pulling that color up towards the top of the cloud, but make sure the left top of each cloud stays white and stays fluffy, because that's where the light is hitting. Now I'm going to swipe in for the next cloud at the bottom. Put some color in there only first, one little strip of color. And then once I have the color from that down, and notice I made a little mistake, so I'm just going to take some paper towel, dot that little last section up, because I want to leave it for the third cloud. And now I'm going to take my water and I'm pulling that up. drying off as I need to so it doesn't get too much water and just become one shade of the color. If I pull up with just enough water and just enough of a dry brush, I'll get some nice variation and make the clouds actually look fluffy. And when it's still wet, I can go in like I just did and add some darker color to where that cloud is still wet to give it some interesting points and let the watercolor do its thing. Third cloud, swiping the color underneath the whole way across, dry off my brush, pull that color. Notice I'm shaking, really kind of pressing on the brush and shaking my hand a little bit because I want it to look organic. You don't want it to look like just a line. So that's why I do the pulling. I pull it all the way up there, give it some little contrast to the right, but leave that top left side alone from each cloud. Top left we leave alone. Adding a little bit more darkness, a little bit more contrast here as you can see. And this will really give the idea that below the cloud is in the shade or in the shadow. And I am going to reflect this darker color in the water too, but that's the very last step. Now I added some darker hues, but notice it looked too much like a brush stroke, so I just pulled some water out and pulled those so they looked less manufactured essentially. And now I'm going to take a lighter purple and go down and do some of these thinner clouds at the bottom on the horizon and just loosely fill them in, leave a little bit of white space, keep it loose. And notice I left a little space at the horizon. Don't worry if you don't. They can actually bleed up together, not a big deal, because at the very end, when everything's dry, you're going to add some contrast. But I'm going to start with these here, and then I'm going to mirror them down in the water. So these straighter clouds that are touching the horizon, a light purple, and then you're going to mirror it down into the water. Side to side strokes, keep them light. You're using your smaller brush. It doesn't have to be a tiny one. You still want to cover some space. And if you do end up going into that middle part where the orange and the yellow is, you can do that. Just make sure you really pick your brush up so you have a nice thin stroke at the end. And it doesn't look too bulky in the water there. So now I'm going in a darker hue even yet. I really want to give these clouds some moodiness and some darkness. Only on the bottom though, and where the light is not hitting. While these are wet, I'm adding a little bit of darkness to those straighter clouds. Should probably find out what they're actually called. That's Shadow. She's snoring. Just touching them up so they look organic. Notice how I'm trying to avoid the cloud above this. It's because I don't want them to bleed together too much, but if they do a little bit, it's not a big deal. And now you see I'm mixing together a darker color as I'm going to go in here to my water. It might bleed up into the cloud a little bit, but it's not a big deal. I'm even going to go darker yet. So I'm drawing almost a dark indigo line across the horizon. You can use a Payne's gray. You can even use black, but I really like that purplish tint it gives, or purplish hue. So don't worry too much about the straightness of it or if it bled up a little bit, because like I said, we're going to really darken it up. So now I'm going to create a U almost, where I'm going to start darkening from the sides and bring them together towards the bottom. So side to side strokes with the dark color I've mixed up. Like I said, it can be an indigo or a Payne's gray, and don't be afraid to get dark in there. This is water after all. Little tiny marks, side to side. I'd say the most important thing here is just to make sure that they are parallel to each other. For the most part, it does not have to be perfect. I don't want perfect lines. You want it to look organic, like something in nature would. But here I am building out the bottom of that U shape I was talking about. I'm going to bring, or I guess you could say a semicircle. I'm bringing all that darkness down toward the bottom so it'll connect with the other side, but still leave that middle part with a lot of yellow and pink and orange visible. I have some of that indigo, so I'm going to just touch up another layer of contrast. I love contrast. It's hard for me not to go too dark, so just keep going a little bit darker each time. Don't go too dark too fast. Now I'm going to let this dry for a few more minutes while I prepare for my last step, which will be darkening everything. So let it dry, make sure you're not going to bleed too much, and I take my indigo, almost pure indigo, and I'm just going to really define my horizon line with the small straight brush. This is an angled flat brush, but you can use a small rounded one as well. Now I'm going the darkest that I'm going to go, and I'm defining my horizon line, and then I'm just going to take that brush and do even darker side to side, building out that semicircle shape again around. And I can't help myself, so a little bit darker still. Using the side of my brush so I don't have perfect straight lines. I just want to give some texture to those clouds. Notice I washed off my brush a little bit and then I brought it and dried it off so that I can pull some of that pigment. If when you pull the pigment, you're just getting one big pile of the same color, that means you probably have too much water and you should dry it off a little bit more before you start pulling. A little bit more over here and I am almost done.